The stethoscope around her neck should have been a warning sign, but I trusted her with my children's health for 3 years before discovering she was also intimately familiar with my husband's anatomy. What started as routine family checkups became the most elaborate betrayal I'd ever witnessed, and the medical ethics complaint that followed didn't just end her career, it exposed a network of professional misconduct that shook our entire community to its core. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Tuesday morning arrived with the familiar chaos of getting 2 kids ready for school, while Marcus rushed around looking for his car keys. Sophie was complaining about her stomach again, the 3rd time this month, and Tyler needed his physical form signed for basketball tryouts. I stood at the kitchen counter, packing lunches and mentally cataloging which child needed which attention, when Marcus finally found his keys buried under yesterday's mail. Sophie's been having those stomach issues again, I mentioned, spreading peanut butter on whole wheat bread. Maybe we should schedule her for another appointment with Dr. Sterling. Marcus paused in the doorway, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify, but it made me look up from the sandwich I was making. She just saw her 2 weeks ago for that cough, he said carefully. I know, but this is different. She's been waking up nauseous, and you know how she usually has such a good appetite. I sealed Sophie's lunch bag and moved on to Tyler's more complicated teenage requirements. Sterling said to bring her back if the symptoms continued. Right, of course. Marcus set down his mug and kissed my forehead, the same routine we'd maintained for 16 years of marriage. You handle the appointment. I've got that presentation to the Portland clients this week. After he left, I found myself staring at the business card magnetized to our refrigerator. Dr. Vanessa Sterling, Family Medicine, Riverside Family Medical Center. She'd been our family doctor for 3 years now, ever since Dr. Patterson retired and sold his practice. The kids adored her, especially Sophie, who'd developed something of a hero worship relationship with the elegant physician, who always remembered to ask about her art projects and soccer games. I called the office at exactly 9 o'clock, knowing from experience that the lines opened promptly and filled quickly. Kelly Morrison, the head nurse, answered with her usual cheerful efficiency. Good morning, Claire. Let me guess, Sophie's tummy troubles again. You know us too well, I laughed, settling into the chair by our kitchen window. Dr. Sterling wanted to see her again if the symptoms persisted, and they definitely have. She had a cancellation this afternoon at 2:30. Would that work? Perfect timing, right after Sophie's school day ended. I confirmed the appointment and spent the rest of the morning handling the endless logistics of suburban family life: grocery shopping, dry cleaning pickup, oil change for my sedan, and 3 loads of laundry that had been accumulating since the weekend. The routine felt comforting, predictable in a way that made me appreciate the stability Marcus and I had built together. At lunch, I met Nina Rodriguez at our usual spot, a small cafe downtown where we'd been catching up monthly since our kids started elementary school together. Nina worked part-time as a paralegal and always had the best stories about the legal drama unfolding at her firm. You look tired, she observed, studying my face over her Caesar salad. Everything okay at home? Just the usual chaos. Sophie's having stomach issues again, and Tyler's convinced he needs new basketball shoes that cost more than my first car. I picked at my soup, realizing I'd been more distracted lately than usual. Marcus has been traveling more for work, which always throws off our routine. How's the new promotion treating him? Good, I think. He seems to really enjoy the challenge, though it means longer hours and more client dinners. I caught myself defending his schedule, something I'd been doing more frequently when friends asked about our family dynamic. The company is expanding into new markets, so there's a lot of opportunity for growth. Nina nodded, but something in her expression suggested she was filing away information rather than just making conversation. As a paralegal, she'd developed an instinct for reading between lines, and I sometimes felt like she could see things I was too close to notice. The afternoon appointment at Dr. Sterling's office followed the usual pattern. Sophie and I arrived 15 minutes early and settled into the familiar waiting room with its cheerful pediatric artwork and carefully curated selection of magazines. The receptionist, a new face I didn't recognize, checked us in with professional politeness. "Sterling will be right with you," she said, handing me the standard forms to update Sophie's information. When Dr. Sterling appeared, she looked as polished as always, tall and elegant with auburn hair, pulled back in a perfect chignon. She moved through the office with the kind of confidence that made both parents and children feel immediately at ease. Sophie practically bounced in her chair when she saw her. "There's my favorite artist," Dr. Sterling said warmly, crouching down to Sophie's eye level. "How are those paintings coming along?" "I finished the one of the mountains you asked about." Sophie beamed. "Mom says I can bring it next time to show you." "I'd love to see it. Now let's talk about this tummy trouble you've been having." The examination was thorough and professional. Dr. Sterling asked detailed questions about Sophie's symptoms, diet, sleep patterns, and stress level. She palpated Sophie's abdomen carefully, listened to her heart and lungs, and took notes in her characteristic neat handwriting. "I think we're looking at a combination of factors," she concluded, settling back in her chair. "Some children Sophie's age develop mild anxiety around school performance, especially bright kids, who put pressure on themselves. The stomach symptoms could be psychosomatic, but I want to rule out any dietary sensitivities as well." She handed me a referral for some basic blood work and a food sensitivity panel. "Let's get these tests done and see Sophie again in 2 weeks. In the meantime, I'm going to recommend some gentle relaxation techniques before bedtime, and maybe keep a brief food diary to identify any potential triggers." As we prepared to leave, Dr. Sterling walked us to the front desk, chatting casually with Sophie about her upcoming art show at school. It was the kind of personal attention that had made our family feel so comfortable with her care over the past 3 years. "Oh, Claire," she said as we reached the reception area. "Please give my regards to Marcus. I haven't seen him at any of the recent community events." Something about the way she said his name made me pause. Not inappropriate, exactly, but familiar in a way that suggested more interaction than I would have expected between my husband and our family doctor. "He's been traveling quite a bit for work lately," I replied, gathering Sophie's jacket and backpack. "Of course, such a dedicated professional. Well, I hope he's taking care of himself with all that stress." She smiled warmly, but I found myself studying her expression for reasons I couldn't quite articulate. Driving home, Sophie chattered about school and her friends, but part of my mind kept circling back to that brief exchange. When had Marcus mentioned work stress to Dr. Sterling? During one of the kids' appointments when I wasn't there. It seemed like an odd detail for her to remember, especially given how busy her practice was. That evening I mentioned the appointment to Marcus over dinner. "Dr. Sterling sends her regards, by the way. She said she hopes you're managing the work stress well." Marcus looked up from his plate of chicken parmesan, fork suspended midway to his mouth. "Work stress? That's what she said. Something about you being such a dedicated professional and hoping you're taking care of yourself." I served myself more salad, keeping my tone casual. "I thought maybe you'd mentioned it during one of the kids' appointments. Must have been when I took Tyler for his sports physical last month." Marcus said after a moment. "You know how doctors always ask about family stress levels and lifestyle factors?" That made sense, though I couldn't recall Tyler mentioning that his father had accompanied him to that appointment. But then again, teenage boys weren't exactly known for providing detailed reports about medical visits. Later that night, as I was folding the day's laundry in our bedroom, I found myself thinking about the small interactions that make up a marriage. 16 years of shared experiences, inside jokes, familiar routines, and unspoken understanding. Marcus was brushing his teeth in the bathroom, humming a song I didn't recognize, and I realized it had been weeks since we'd had a real conversation about anything beyond schedules and logistics. "How was your day?" I asked when he emerged from the bathroom. "The usual chaos at the office. Jenkins is pushing for the Portland expansion, which means more travel in the coming months." He settled into bed next to me, scrolling through his phone. "How did Sophie's appointment go?" I filled him in on Dr. Sterling's assessment and the planned follow-up tests. Marcus listened with the appropriate level of parental concern, asking the right questions and offering reassuring comments about how these issues usually resolved themselves as children mature. "She's a good doctor," he said, setting his phone on the nightstand. "The kids are lucky to have someone who pays such close attention to their overall well-being. She really does seem to care about them as individuals, not just patients." I agreed, turning off my bedside lamp. As I lay in the darkness listening to Marcus's breathing gradually deepen into sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in our conversation patterns lately, not dramatically but subtly, like a radio station that had drifted slightly off frequency. The content was the same, but the clarity was somehow diminished. Thursday brought Sophie's bloodwork appointment at the hospital lab, a routine procedure that she handled with her usual bravery. The technician was efficient and kind, distracting Sophie with questions about school while drawing the necessary samples. Afterward, we stopped for ice cream to celebrate her courage, a tradition we'd established during her previous medical adventures. "Do you think Sterling will find something wrong with me?" Sophie asked, swirling her vanilla cone thoughtfully. "I think Dr. Sterling will figure out how to help you feel better," I replied carefully. "Sometimes our bodies just need a little extra attention to work properly." That afternoon, while Sophie was at her friend's house and Tyler was at basketball practice, I found myself with a rare moment of solitude. I sat in our living room, looking around at the life Marcus and I had built together. Family photos chronicled our journey from young newlyweds to established parents. Vacation memories mixed with milestone celebrations and everyday moments that had seemed ordinary at the time but now felt precious. The house was quiet except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock Marcus had inherited from his father. 16 years of marriage, 2 beautiful children, a comfortable home, and a shared commitment to building something lasting together. Whatever small uncertainties I'd been feeling lately were probably just the normal adjustments that came with evolving family dynamics and work pressures. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Sterling's office, confirming Sophie's follow-up appointment for the following week, and noting that the lab results should be available by then. Standard medical communication. But something about seeing Dr. Sterling's name on my phone screen made me pause again. When Marcus came home that evening, he seemed more relaxed than he'd been in weeks. He helped Tyler with homework, played a board game with Sophie, and even suggested we watch a movie together after the kids went to bed. The evening felt like a return to our normal family rhythm, and I chided myself for reading too much into minor conversational details. "I was thinking we should plan a family weekend getaway soon," Marcus said as we settled on the couch together. "Maybe rent a cabin up at the lake, do some hiking, let the kids disconnect from their devices for a couple of days." "That sounds perfect," I agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "Sophie would love to bring her art supplies and paint outdoors, and Tyler could probably use a break from the basketball pressure cooker. Sometimes I think we pack too much into their schedules." As Marcus outlined potential destinations and activities, I felt the familiar warmth of our partnership reasserting itself. This was the man I'd married, the father who prioritized family time and understood the importance of creating lasting memories with our children. Whatever minor concerns I'd been harboring seemed trivial in the face of his genuine enthusiasm for strengthening our family bond. The weekend passed in a comfortable blur of household projects, children's activities, and the kind of low-key family time that reminded me why I'd chosen this life. Marcus worked in the garden while I organized closets, Tyler practiced basketball shots in the driveway, and Sophie set up an elaborate art station on the back patio. Sunday evening found us all gathered around the dinner table, sharing stories from the weekend and planning the upcoming week. Marcus announced that his Portland trip had been postponed, which meant he'd be home for Sophie's school art show and Tyler's basketball game. Dr. Sterling said she might stop by the art show if her schedule allows. Sophie mentioned casually, "She's really interested in seeing my mountain painting." "That's nice of her to take such personal interest in her patients," I said, though something about the idea of our family doctor attending school events struck me as unusually involved. "She's just really caring," Marcus added. Not many physicians go beyond the clinical relationship these days. After the kids went to bed, Marcus and I sat on the back porch with our coffee, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The evening was warm enough to sit outside comfortably, and the neighborhood was settling into its familiar Sunday night rhythm. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding Sophie's anxiety," Marcus said, reaching over to take my hand. "Maybe we should consider family counseling, just to make sure we're supporting her in the best way possible." "I think that's a wise idea," I replied, squeezing his fingers. "Sometimes an outside perspective can help identify patterns we're too close to see." As we sat together in the gathering twilight, I felt grateful for the stability and love that defined our family. Marcus was thoughtful and engaged. The children were thriving despite minor bumps along the way, and our future looked bright with possibility. Monday morning began with the usual orchestrated chaos of getting everyone ready for their respective day. Marcus left early for a breakfast meeting with potential clients. Tyler caught the bus to school, and Sophie and I had our regular routine of breakfast conversation and last-minute homework checks. At 9:30, Dr. Sterling's office called with Sophie's lab results. Kelly Morrison's voice sounded carefully neutral as she delivered the news that everything had come back within normal ranges. But Dr. Sterling wanted to discuss some additional observations during our scheduled appointment later that week. "Is there anything concerning in the result?" I asked, settling into my kitchen chair with a notebook to take down any important information. "Nothing that indicates any serious medical issues," Kelly assured me. "Dr. Sterling just likes to be thorough in her assessments, especially with children who are experiencing ongoing symptoms." After hanging up, I felt a mixture of relief and continued uncertainty. Normal lab results were definitely good news, but the fact that Dr. Sterling wanted additional discussion suggested there were still pieces of the puzzle to be explored. The rest of Monday passed quietly, with afternoon carpool duties, grocery shopping, and the evening routine of homework supervision and dinner preparation. Marcus returned home in good spirits, reporting successful client meetings and progress on the delayed Portland project. Kelly called with Sophie's lab results. I told him as we cleaned up after dinner. Everything came back normal, but Dr. Sterling wants to discuss some additional observations at Friday's appointment. Additional observations? Marcus looked up from loading the dishwasher. "What kind of observations?" Kelly didn't specify, just said Dr. Sterling likes to be thorough. I wiped down the kitchen counters, maintaining the casual tone that had become our default for discussing medical matter. "Probably just wants to talk through some lifestyle modifications or monitoring strategies." "Well, that's good that she's being so attentive to Sophie's case," Marcus said, though something in his voice sounded slightly strained. Tuesday evening brought the monthly Parent Association meeting at Magnolia Elementary, an event I rarely missed despite the sometimes tedious discussions about fundraising and curriculum changes. Marcus had a client dinner, so I attended alone, settling into the familiar auditorium with the other dedicated parents who prioritized staying informed about school policies and programs. The meeting covered routine business until Principal Anderson introduced a special presentation about the school's new wellness initiative. The program would include mental health resources, nutrition education, and partnerships with local healthcare providers to support student well-being. "We're fortunate to have several community physicians who volunteered their expertise," Principal Anderson announced, gesturing toward a small group of professionals seated in the front row. "Dr. Sterling from Riverside Family Medical has been particularly generous with her time and knowledge." I looked toward the front of the auditorium and saw Dr. Sterling sitting with two other healthcare providers, taking notes during the presentation. She looked as polished and professional as always, but something about seeing her in this school setting felt unexpectedly significant. During the break, several parents approached the visiting physicians with questions about the wellness program. I found myself walking toward the front of the room, drawn by curiosity about Dr. Sterling's involvement in Sophie's school community. "Mrs. Dawson," Dr. Sterling smiled warmly when she saw me approaching. "How lovely to see you here. I didn't realize you were so involved in school activities." "I try to stay informed about programs that might affect Sophie and Tyler," I replied, returning her smile. "This wellness initiative sounds wonderful. It really is an exciting opportunity to support children's overall health beyond just treating symptoms when they arise," Dr. Sterling said, her enthusiasm evident. "Prevention and early intervention can make such a dramatic difference in long-term outcomes." We chatted for several minutes about the program details and Sophie's ongoing care. Dr. Sterling mentioned that she'd been thinking about Sophie's case, and had some ideas to discuss during Friday's appointment. She also asked about Marcus again, noting that she hoped his work travel wasn't creating too much stress for the family. "He's managing well," I assured her, though I know he appreciates having a family doctor who understands the pressures of professional advance. "It's important for families to have healthcare providers who see the whole picture," Dr. Sterling agreed. "Sometimes the stress on one family member can manifest in unexpected ways in others, especially sensitive children like Sophie." As I drove home from the meeting, I found myself replaying our conversation and trying to understand why Dr. Sterling's interest in Marcus's work situation continued to feel slightly unusual. Professional healthcare providers were trained to consider family dynamics and stress factors, so her questions were probably just thorough medical practice. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected phone call from Nina Rodriguez. Her voice carried an urgency that immediately caught my attention. "Claire, can you meet me for coffee this morning? There's something I need to discuss with you, and I'd rather do it in person." An hour later we sat across from each other at our usual cafe, but Nina's typical easy demeanor had been replaced by something more serious and careful. "What I'm about to tell you might be completely innocent, but my legal training has taught me to pay attention when patterns start emerging," she began, stirring her coffee nervously. "Last night at the parent meeting, I noticed something that's been bothering me." My stomach tightened with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. "What kind of something, Dr. Sterling?" "The way she was asking about Marcus and how familiar she seemed with details about your family situation." Nina leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Claire, I've seen her with Marcus." The words hit me like cold water. "Seen them together where?" "3 weeks ago I was having lunch with a client at that new restaurant downtown, the one with the outdoor seating area. I saw them sitting together at a corner table, and it definitely wasn't a casual encounter. They were leaning in close, talking intently, and there was something about their body language that seemed very personal." I stared at Nina, trying to process what she was telling me. "Are you sure it was them?" "Positive." I thought about mentioning it then, but I talked myself out of it because there could have been innocent explanations. Maybe they were discussing one of the kids' medical care, or perhaps they'd run into each other and were just being friendly. Nina's expression grew more troubled. "But then last night, watching how she interacted with you, asking about Marcus again, it felt calculated in a way that made me uncomfortable." The cafe suddenly felt too warm, too bright, too normal for the conversation we were having. I could hear the hiss of the espresso machine and the casual chatter of other customers, but it all seemed to be happening at a great distance. "What should I do with this information?" I asked quietly. "I don't know," Nina admitted. "Maybe I'm completely wrong, and there's a perfectly innocent explanation, but Claire, you deserve to know what I saw, and you deserve to trust your instincts about whether something feels off." As I drove home, my mind raced through recent conversations and interactions, searching for clues I might have missed. Marcus's familiarity with Dr. Sterling's questions about work stress, her detailed knowledge of his travel schedule, the way she'd asked about him during multiple encounters. When I arrived home, the house felt different somehow, as if Nina's words had shifted the lens through which I saw my familiar surroundings. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at Dr. Sterling's business card on the refrigerator, and realized that everything I thought I knew about my life might be built on assumptions I'd never thought to question. Thursday passed in a strange fog of normal activities, performed while my mind wrestled with unprecedented uncertainty. I helped Sophie with homework, attended Tyler's basketball practice, prepared dinner, and maintained conversations with Marcus that felt suddenly foreign and careful. That night, as Marcus slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and wondering how many other details I'd overlooked in my trust and comfort with our established routine. The woman who'd woken up Tuesday morning confident in her family's stability was gone, replaced by someone who suddenly understood that the most devastating betrayals often hide behind the most trusted relationships. Friday's appointment with Dr. Sterling loomed ahead like a test I wasn't sure I was prepared to take, but I knew that whatever I discovered would change everything that came after. Friday's appointment arrived with an unseasonable chill in the air that seemed to mirror the cold uncertainty settling in my chest. Sophie bounced into Dr. Sterling's office with her usual enthusiasm, clutching the mountain painting she'd promised to bring. I followed behind, hyper-aware of every interaction, every word, every gesture that had previously seemed routine and professional. Dr. Sterling greeted us with her characteristic warmth, but now I found myself studying her expressions for hidden meanings. When she complimented Sophie's artwork, was there genuine interest or practiced performance? When she asked about family dynamics, was it medical thoroughness or fishing for personal information? The lab results show everything within normal parameters, Dr. Sterling began, settling into her chair with Sophie's file open before her. However, I've been thinking about the pattern of symptoms, and I believe we should explore some environmental and emotional factors that might be contributing to Sophie's discomfort. She pulled out a tablet and began showing us a chart that mapped stress responses in children. Sometimes physical symptoms in children can be their way of expressing anxiety about changes in their family environment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Has there been anything different at home lately? Changes in routine, increased tension, or perhaps one parent traveling more frequently? The question felt loaded with meaning. I couldn't quite grasp. Marcus has been traveling more for work recently, I admitted, watching Dr. Sterling's face carefully. But we've tried to maintain consistency for the children. Travel can be particularly stressful for families. Dr. Sterling nodded thoughtfully. Children are very perceptive about parental stress, even when adults think they're hiding it well. How is Marcus handling the increased work pressure? Again, the familiar tone of someone who knew more about Marcus's situation than our brief family medical interactions would warrant. He seems to be managing it well, I replied carefully. Though I suppose any major changes in responsibility can be challenging. Dr. Sterling made notes on her tablet, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. I'm going to recommend some family counseling resources that specialize in helping children navigate parental stress. Sometimes just having a neutral space to express concerns can alleviate physical symptoms dramatically. She handed me a list of therapists, but as our hands briefly touched during the exchange, I noticed something that made my breath catch. On her ring finger was a thin gold band I'd never seen before. Delicate and expensive looking, nothing like the simple wedding set she'd worn during previous appointments. That's a beautiful ring, I said impulsively, the words escaping before I could stop them. Sterling glanced down at her hand, and for just a moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or discomfort. Thank you, she said quietly. It was a recent gift. The appointment concluded with scheduling another follow-up in 3 weeks, and instructions to continue monitoring Sophie's symptoms. As we gathered our belongings, Dr. Sterling walked us to the reception area, chatting with Sophie about her upcoming art show. Please give my best to Marcus, she said, as we prepared to leave. I hope his Portland project is progressing smoothly. My steps faltered. Portland project? Oh, I thought he'd mentioned it during Tyler's last appointment. The expansion into new markets. Sterling's voice carried a careful neutrality that hadn't been there moments before. Of course, I managed, though my mind was racing. Marcus had mentioned Portland clients, but I couldn't recall him discussing specific project details with me, let alone with our family doctor during a routine sports physical. In the car, Sophie chattered about Dr. Sterling's praise for her painting, but I barely heard her words. My thoughts were spinning around that new ring, the too familiar knowledge of Marcus's work projects, and the growing collection of small interactions that no longer felt coincidental. That afternoon, while Sophie played at a friend's house, I sat in my car outside the medical center and called Nina. She knows about Marcus's Portland project, I said without preamble when Nina answered. Details he supposedly shared during Tyler's sports physical, but I don't remember Tyler mentioning that Marcus even went to that appointment. Claire, where are you right now? Still at the medical center. Nina. She was wearing a new ring, expensive, delicate gold band that definitely wasn't there before. When I complimented it, she said it was a recent gift, There was a long pause on the other end. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I need to find out when Tyler's sports physical actually happened and who was there. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. And I'm thinking I need to start paying closer attention to things I've been taking for granted. Be careful, Claire. If your suspicions are correct, you want to gather information quietly before anyone realizes you're looking. That evening, I approached Tyler while he was doing homework in his room. How did your sports physical go last month? Was it everything you needed for basketball? Tyler looked up from his math problems with a slightly annoyed expression. Teenagers reserved for unnecessary parental questions. It was fine, Mom. Just the basic stuff. Did Dad come with you, or did I take you? I can't remember which one of us had the appointment on our calendar. You took me, remember? Dad was in that client meeting that ran late. Tyler returned to his calculations, clearly considering the conversation finished. My heart began beating faster. Marcus hadn't attended Tyler's sports physical, which meant his conversation with Dr. Sterling about work stress and Portland projects had happened during some other interaction, an interaction he'd never mentioned to me. Over the weekend, I found myself observing Marcus with new eyes. Saturday morning, he spent an unusual amount of time on his phone, stepping out to the garden to take calls he described as work-related. When I offered to help him organize his home office, he declined with a casual comment about having a specific system he preferred to maintain. Sunday afternoon brought an unexpected opportunity. Marcus announced he needed to run to the office to prepare for Monday's meetings, leaving me alone with the children and a chance to think clearly about the pattern of information I'd been collecting. I made a mental list of what I knew. Dr. Sterling had detailed knowledge of Marcus's work situation that exceeded normal patient interaction. She'd been seen having what appeared to be an intimate lunch with my husband. She was wearing expensive jewelry she'd received as a recent gift. Marcus had lied about attending Tyler's sports physical. Monday morning, I dropped the children at school and drove to Riverside Family Medical Center with a plan forming in my mind. Instead of going inside, I parked across the street at a coffee shop with clear sightlines to the medical building and waited. At 10:15, Marcus's silver sedan pulled into the medical center parking lot. I watched him get out of his car, check his appearance in the side mirror, and walk purposefully toward the building entrance. He wasn't limping, coughing, or showing any signs of medical distress that would warrant an urgent appointment. 45 minutes later, he emerged from the building walking alongside Dr. Sterling. They stopped beside his car, and even from my distance, their body language suggested a conversation far more personal than doctor-patient interaction. Sterling touched his arm lightly. He leaned down to speak close to her ear, and when they separated, there was a moment of eye contact that lasted longer than professional courtesy would require. I sat in the coffee shop parking lot for 20 minutes after Marcus drove away, trying to process what I'd witnessed. My husband of 16 years, the father of my children, was having regular appointments with our family doctor that had nothing to do with medical care. That afternoon, I called Dr. Sterling's office from my cell phone, disguising my voice slightly and using my maiden name. I'd like to schedule an appointment with Dr. Sterling, I told the receptionist. Of course. What type of appointment are you looking for? Just a general consultation. I'm considering switching to a new family physician and wanted to meet with Dr. Sterling to discuss her practice. The receptionist checked the schedule. I have an opening Thursday at 2:30, but I should mention that Dr. Sterling isn't currently accepting new patients. She's actually planning to reduce her patient load in the coming months. Reduce her patient load? Yes. She's considering some significant life changes that will affect her practice schedule. Would you still like the consultation appointment? I declined and hung up. My mind reeling. Dr. Sterling was planning life changes that would affect her medical practice. Combined with everything else I'd discovered, a disturbing picture was beginning to emerge. Tuesday evening, I waited until Marcus was in the shower before quietly entering his home office. His laptop sat closed on the desk, and his briefcase leaned against the chair. I'd never gone through his personal belongings before, had never felt the need to question his privacy or honesty. His briefcase was unlocked, containing the usual collection of client files, business cards, and travel itineraries. But tucked into a side pocket was something that made my hands tremble. A receipt from Riverside Jewelers, dated 2 weeks ago, for a woman's gold band ring in the amount of $800. The receipt was made out to Marcus Dawson, with a note in the jeweler's handwriting that said, "Sized for V. Ready for pickup Tuesday, V.S. Vanessa Sterling." I photographed the receipt with my phone, carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, and retreated to the kitchen before Marcus finished his shower. When he appeared 20 minutes later, hair still damp and wearing his favorite weekend shirt, I managed to maintain normal conversation about the next day's schedule and Sophie's upcoming art show. Dr. Sterling mentioned she might stop by Sophie's art show if her schedule permits, I said, testing his reaction. Marcus paused in the act of pouring himself a glass of water. "Really? That's nice of her to take such personal interest." "I thought so too. It's unusual for family doctors to attend their patients' school events, but she seems very dedicated to building relationships with the families she serves." "She's definitely thorough in her approach," Marcus agreed, though something in his tone suggested carefully chosen words. Wednesday morning brought Sophie's art show, a delightful chaos of proud parents, excited children, and colorful displays throughout the school gymnasium. I helped Sophie arrange her mountain painting alongside her classmates' work, watching her beam with pride at the positive attention from teachers and visitors. At 10:30, Dr. Sterling arrived wearing an elegant blue dress and the gold ring I'd seen 2 days ago. She moved through the exhibit with genuine interest, spending several minutes admiring Sophie's work and engaging in animated conversation about technique and inspiration. "Mrs. Dawson, Sophie's artistic talent is really remarkable," Dr. Sterling said when she reached me near the refreshment table. "You must be very proud." "We are. She's always been drawn to creative expression." I watched Dr. Sterling's face carefully as I continued. Marcus was disappointed he couldn't be here today. He had an important client meeting that couldn't be rescheduled. "Of course, his work demands are quite significant right now," Dr. Sterling replied smoothly. "I'm sure Sophie understands how hard he works to provide for your family." Again, the too familiar knowledge of Marcus's professional situation. "It's thoughtful of you to be so understanding about the pressures our family faces. Not every doctor takes such personal interest in their patients' home dynamics." Something shifted in Dr. Sterling's expression, a flicker of caution that hadn't been there before. "I believe in treating the whole family, not just individual symptoms," she said carefully. After Dr. Sterling left, I found myself studying the other parents and wondering how many marriages in our community harbored secrets I'd never suspected. The cheerful chaos of the art show continued around me, but I felt isolated by the knowledge I'd been accumulating. That evening, Marcus returned home in particularly good spirits, bringing flowers and suggesting we order takeout from our favorite restaurant. His attentiveness felt both familiar and foreign, as if I was watching someone perform the role of devoted husband while thinking about entirely different priorities. "How was Sophie's art show?" he asked while setting out plates for our Thai food delivery. "Wonderful." Dr. Sterling stopped by and spent quite a bit of time admiring Sophie's work. She seemed genuinely impressed by Sophie's artistic development. "That was thoughtful of her," Marcus said, though he didn't meet my eyes while speaking. She mentioned again how understanding she is about work pressures and family dynamics. "I'm grateful Sophie has a doctor who takes such comprehensive interest in her patients' well-being." Marcus nodded, opening containers of food with focused attention that seemed disproportionate to the task. Thursday afternoon, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. I drove to Dr. Sterling's office building and waited in the parking lot until her afternoon appointments ended. At 5:30 she emerged from the building and walked toward a red BMW. I'd never noticed before. Instead of following her, I walked into the medical building and approached the evening cleaning crew that was preparing to service the office. "Excuse me," I said to a woman pushing a cart of supplies. I think I left my scarf in Dr. Sterling's office during my appointment today. Is there any way I could retrieve it quickly? The cleaning woman, whose name tag read Maria, looked sympathetic. Doctors' offices are usually locked, but let me check if she left it open. Dr. Sterling's office door was indeed locked, but Maria had master keys for cleaning purposes. Just be quick, she said kindly. I'm not supposed to let patients in after hours. I stepped into Dr. Sterling's office with my heart pounding, knowing I was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The space was impeccably organized, with medical texts arranged on shelves and patient files secured in locked cabinets. On her desk, however, was a leather appointment book that lay open to the current week. I could see patient names scheduled at regular intervals, but interspersed among the medical appointments were entries that made my blood run cold. Tuesday 10:15 a.m. MD, personal consultation. Thursday 2 p.m. MD, follow-up discussion. Friday 11:30 a.m. MD, planning session. MD, Marcus Dawson. My husband had been scheduling regular personal appointments with our family doctor, disguised among her patient roster, but clearly separate from any legitimate medical care. I photographed the appointment book pages with my phone, my hands shaking as I documented the evidence of systematic deception. There were appointments going back months, sometimes twice a week, always scheduled during hours when I believed Marcus was in business meetings or traveling for work. Find what you were looking for? Maria asked when I emerged from the office. Yes, thank you so much for your help, I managed, clutching my purse against my chest to stop my hands from trembling. Driving home, I felt as if I was moving through a different world than the one I'd inhabited that morning. The familiar streets of my neighborhood looked the same, but everything felt fundamentally altered by the knowledge I now carried. That evening, Marcus suggested we watch a movie together after the children went to bed, an offer that would have delighted me a week ago but now felt like performance art. As we sat on the couch, his arm around my shoulders in our traditional movie-watching position, I found myself studying his profile and wondering how long he'd been living a double life. Friday morning, I called Nina and asked her to meet me for coffee. When she arrived at our usual cafe, she took one look at my face and steered me to a corner table away from other customers. "What did you find?" she asked without preamble. I showed her the photographs on my phone, the jewelry receipt, the appointment book entries, the documentation of Marcus's lies about Tyler's sports physical. Nina studied each image carefully, her legal training evident in the systematic way she processed the information. "Claire, this is extensive deception," she said finally. "This isn't a casual encounter or a momentary lapse in judgment. This is a sustained relationship that's been going on for months. What should I do?" "First, you need to protect yourself and your children. Document everything you've found and store it securely. Second, you need to decide what outcome you want from this situation." "I want the truth," I said without hesitation. "I want everyone to understand what they've done and face the consequences of their choices." Nina leaned forward, her voice gentle but serious. "Claire, if Dr. Sterling is having a relationship with a patient's husband while continuing to treat the family's children, that's a serious ethical violation. Medical professionals can lose their licenses for boundary violations like this." "Good," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Maybe she should lose her license. Before you make any decisions about reporting this, you need to gather all the evidence you can, and you need to think carefully about how you want to handle the situation with Mark." That afternoon, while Marcus was supposedly in client meetings, and the children were in school, I sat at my kitchen table and created a timeline of deception. Every suspicious interaction, every lie, every moment when I'd felt something was off, but had dismissed my instincts in favor of trust. The pattern was clear and devastating. My husband and our family doctor had been conducting an affair for months, using her medical practice as cover for their meetings, and exploiting my trust in both of them to maintain their deception. But as I stared at the evidence spread across my kitchen table, I realized something important had shifted inside me. The woman who had walked into Dr. Sterling's office a week ago, worried about her daughter's stomach problems, was gone. In her place was someone harder, clearer, and absolutely determined to make sure that everyone who had betrayed my family's trust would face the full consequences of their choices. The investigation phase was over. Now it was time to plan. Saturday morning brought an unexpected opportunity when Marcus announced he needed to go into the office to catch up on paperwork. "I'll probably be there most of the day," he said, kissing my forehead with practiced affection. "Don't wait up if you and the kids want to do something fun." After he left, I loaded Tyler and Sophie into the car for what I told them would be a special Saturday adventure. Our first stop was the Riverside Jewelers, where I'd decided to gather additional evidence about Marcus's recent purchase. "I'm hoping you can help me," I told the sales associate, a friendly woman in her 50s, who introduced herself as Janet. "My husband bought a ring here recently, and I'd like to purchase matching earrings as a surprise." "Of course. Do you have the receipt, or remember when the purchase was made?" "It was about 2 weeks ago, under the name Marcus Dawson, a gold band ring." Janet pulled up the transaction on her computer, and her face brightened with recognition. "Oh yes, I remember this order. Very specific sizing requirements, and he was quite particular about the style. Beautiful choice for an anniversary gift." "Anniversary gift? Well, that's what he said it was for. He mentioned wanting something elegant, but not too flashy for someone who worked in a professional environment." Very thoughtful to consider her workplace requirement. I managed to maintain my composure while Janet showed me potential earring options, but internally I was reeling. Marcus had specifically told the jeweler the ring was an anniversary gift for someone who worked in a professional environment. "Dr. Sterling, actually, let me think about the earrings a bit more," I said, declining to make a purchase. "Thank you for your help." From the jewelry store, I drove to the office building where Marcus worked. His car wasn't in the parking lot, confirming that his claimed Saturday work session was another lie. On impulse, I parked and walked into the building lobby, where a security guard sat behind a reception desk. "I'm looking for my husband, Marcus Dawson," I told the guard. "He said he'd be working today, but I don't see his car in the parking lot." The guard checked his log. "No one signed in to work today, ma'am. Building's been empty except for maintenance since 7 this morning." I thanked him and returned to my car, where Tyler and Sophie were waiting patiently for our promised adventure to continue. As I drove them to the park for an afternoon of normal family activities, my mind was working through the implications of Marcus's latest deception. If he wasn't at work, where was he spending his Saturday? And why had he felt the need to lie about his plans, when a simple "I have errands to run" would have sufficed? That evening Marcus returned home at 6:30 with takeout from our favorite barbecue restaurant, and stories about his productive day at the office. He described spreadsheets he'd organized and reports he'd prepared, creating an elaborate fiction about his Saturday activities. "How was your day with the kids?" he asked while we set up dinner. "We had a lovely time. Went to the park, did some shopping, just enjoyed being together." I kept my voice light and casual, matching his tone of routine family conversation. After dinner, while Marcus helped Tyler with homework, I retreated to my bedroom and created a secure folder on my phone to store all the evidence I'd been collecting. Photographs, notes, timelines, and contact information for resources Nina had provided. Sunday passed in a strange suspension of normalcy. We attended church, where Marcus shook hands with neighbors and discussed community events with the casual warmth of a devoted family man. We had lunch at home, worked in the garden, and spent the afternoon playing board games with the children. To any outside observer, we appeared to be the picture of suburban family contentment. But underneath the surface, I was methodically planning the systematic exposure of the betrayal that had been hiding behind our normal routine. Sunday evening, after the children were in bed, Marcus suggested we sit on the back porch with wine and enjoy the mild weather. As we settled into our familiar chairs, I realized this might be one of our last moments of apparent marital harmony. "I've been thinking about that family vacation we discussed," Marcus said, swirling his wine thoughtfully. "Maybe we should plan something really special this year. The kids are getting older, and these family times become more precious. That sounds wonderful, I agreed, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. Where were you thinking? Somewhere we've never been before. A place where we can make entirely new memories together. As Marcus talked about potential destinations and activities, I found myself wondering if he was planning a family vacation, as a way to assuage guilt about his affair, or if he was simply so compartmentalized that he could genuinely enjoy family planning while betraying us. Claire, you seem distant lately, Marcus said, reaching over to touch my hand. Is everything okay? The question was delivered with such apparent sincerity that for a moment I almost doubted my own evidence. This was the man I'd married, the father of my children, someone who could express genuine concern for my well-being while conducting a months-long affair with our family doctor. I'm fine, I said carefully, just thinking about Sophie's ongoing health concerns and hoping we're addressing them properly. Dr. Sterling seems very committed to figuring out the underlying issues, Marcus replied. We're lucky to have someone so thorough caring for our family. Yes, I agree. We're very lucky to have such dedicated healthcare providers. As we sat together in the gathering darkness, I realized that this conversation would probably be the last time we'd speak as a couple operating under shared assumptions about our marriage. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of exposing the truth and demanding accountability from everyone who had betrayed my trust. The investigation phase had revealed the scope of the deception. Now it was time to start planning justice. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity about what needed to be done. While Marcus rushed through his usual routine of coffee and morning news, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, researching the Riverside Medical Ethics Board and their complaint process. The children ate breakfast around me, chattering about school projects and weekend plans, their innocent normalcy providing stark contrast to the calculated betrayal I was preparing to expose. The Ethics Board's website laid out clear procedures for reporting professional misconduct. Boundary violations between healthcare providers and patients' families were explicitly listed as serious offenses that could result in license suspension or revocation. The complaint form was detailed, requiring specific dates, documentation, and witness statements. After Marcus left for what he claimed was an early client meeting, I called the ethics board directly. A professional woman named Patricia Wells answered, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to handling sensitive allegations. I need to understand the process for filing a complaint against a physician for boundary violations, I told her, keeping my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. Can you provide some general details about the nature of the alleged violations? Patricia asked. A family physician who has been treating my children appears to be having a personal relationship with my husband. I have documentation of regular non-medical appointments, expensive gifts, and lies about the nature of their interactions. Patricia's tone became more focused. Those are serious allegations, Mrs. Dwyer. I'd prefer not to provide my name until I understand the process completely. Of course, let me explain how our investigation procedures work. When we receive a formal complaint with supporting evidence, we initiate a preliminary review. If the allegations appear credible, we conduct a full investigation that includes interviews with all parties involved, review of medical records, and examination of any physical evidence. What kind of consequences could the physician face if the allegations are substantiated? Boundary violations of this nature typically result in license suspension, mandatory counseling, and in severe cases, permanent revocation of medical privileges. The physician would also face civil liability and potential criminal charges depending on the specific circumstance. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet kitchen and realized I was planning something that would destroy multiple lives. Dr. Sterling's medical career, Marcus's reputation, our children's sense of family security. But the alternative was continuing to live a lie while two people who had betrayed my trust faced no consequences for their actions. I spent the rest of Monday morning creating a comprehensive documentation system. Every photograph, receipt, appointment record, and timeline was organized into categories that would make sense to investigators. The evidence was damning and extensive, painting a clear picture of sustained deception and professional misconduct. Tuesday brought an unexpected development when Dr. Sterling's office called to schedule Sophie's follow-up appointment. Dr. Sterling would like to see Sophie next week to discuss the counseling recommendations and check on her symptom progress. Kelly Morrison explained. Of course, I replied, though something in Kelly's tone suggested more than routine medical scheduling. Is there a particular day that works best? Dr. Sterling mentioned that she'd like to meet with you privately before Sophie's appointment, if that's possible. She said there are some family dynamic issues she wants to discuss. The request felt loaded with meaning I couldn't quite decipher. What kind of family dynamic issues? She didn't specify, but she seemed to think it would be beneficial to have a conversation without Sophie present. Would you be available for a brief consultation before the regular appointment? I agreed to the meeting, knowing it would provide an opportunity to observe Dr. Sterling's behavior while she was unaware of my growing knowledge about her relationship with Mark. Wednesday afternoon, I drove to the address Nina had given me for Catherine Brooks, the family attorney she'd recommended. Catherine's office occupied the top floor of a renovated Victorian house downtown, with tall windows overlooking the river and elegant furnishings that suggested both success and discretion. Catherine herself was a woman in her early 50s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to assess everything with legal precision. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, and occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates and documentation. You've been remarkably thorough in gathering evidence, she said when I finished explaining the situation. The documentation you've collected would be compelling in any legal proceeding. What are my options for protecting myself and the children? Several approaches are available. You could file for legal separation with spousal support, which would provide financial security while maintaining your married status. Alternatively, divorce proceedings would permanently dissolve the marriage and establish custody arrangement. Catherine leaned back in her chair, studying my face carefully. However, given the professional misconduct involved, you have an additional option that could be quite powerful. Filing the medical ethics complaint first could strengthen your position in any subsequent family court proceeding. How so? If Dr. Sterling loses her medical license due to your complaint, it validates your claims about the affair and demonstrates that Marcus was involved in activity that violated professional standards. Family court judges take these factors into account when determining spousal support and custody arrangements. I spent an hour with Catherine, discussing legal strategies and potential outcomes. By the time I left her office, I had a clear understanding of my options and the timeline for implementing them. Thursday morning brought Sophie's scheduled appointment with Dr. Sterling, including the private consultation she'd requested. I arrived 30 minutes early for our meeting, using the time to observe the normal flow of the medical office and prepare mentally for what might be a challenging conversation. Dr. Sterling's private office felt different this time, perhaps because I was seeing it through the lens of someone who knew about her extracurricular activity. The medical diplomas on the wall, the family photos on her desk, the professional demeanor all seemed like elaborate staging for someone living a double life. Thank you for agreeing to meet privately, Dr. Sterling began, settling into her chair with a carefully composed expression. I wanted to discuss some observations about Sophie's family environment that might be affecting her symptoms. What kind of observations? Children Sophie's age are very sensitive to tension between parents, even when adults think they're hiding relationship problems effectively. Sterling's voice carried the measured tone of professional concern, but something in her eyes suggested deeper knowledge. Has there been any strain in your marriage lately that might be creating stress for Sophie? The question felt like a fishing expedition disguised as medical inquiry. Marcus and I have the usual challenges of balancing work and family responsibilities, but nothing that would create unusual stress for the children. Sometimes partners can be unaware of each other's stress levels, especially when one person is dealing with significant professional pressure. Dr. Sterling leaned forward slightly, her expression suggesting intimate knowledge of Marcus's situation. Men in particular tend to compartmentalize their concerns rather than sharing them with their family. Marcus has always been good about communicating his work challenges, I replied carefully, watching for any reaction that might reveal her true motivations for this conversation. That's wonderful. Some wives struggle when their husbands become more distant or preoccupied with career advancement. It takes a special kind of understanding to support a partner through major professional transitions. The comment felt deliberately pointed, as if Sterling was testing my awareness of something specific. I've always tried to be supportive of Marcus's career goals, I said neutrally. Of course you have. It's clear that you're a devoted wife and mother. Sterling made a note on her pad, though I suspected the notation had little to do with Sophie's medical care. Sometimes, though, the most understanding wives need support when their marriages face unexpected challenge. Change is inevitable in any long-term relationship. Career pressures, evolving personal needs, the natural growth that occurs as people mature. Not every marriage can adapt to these changes successfully. I stared at Dr. Sterling, realizing she was essentially providing me with advance warning about the end of my marriage, while pretending to offer professional medical advice. The audacity was breathtaking. I appreciate your concern for our family's well-being, I said finally. Marcus and I are committed to working through whatever challenges we face together. Something shifted in Dr. Sterling's expression, a flicker of what might have been disappointment or frustration. Of course. Well, I think Sophie will benefit from the family counseling resources I recommend. Children need stability during times of transition. The appointment with Sophie proceeded normally, with Dr. Sterling conducting a standard medical examination and reviewing symptom progress. But the undercurrent of her earlier conversation colored every interaction, making her professional demeanor feel like an elaborate performance. Driving home, I realized Dr. Sterling had essentially confirmed my suspicions, while trying to prepare me for the eventual dissolution of my marriage. She was operating under the assumption that I would accept Marcus's infidelity passively, perhaps even gracefully stepping aside to allow their relationship to continue openly. That assumption was about to prove spectacularly incorrect. Friday afternoon, I received a phone call that provided the final piece of evidence I needed. Robert Sterling, Dr. Sterling's husband, called my home number during a time when he apparently knew Marcus would be at work. Mrs. Dawson, this is Robert Sterling. I believe we should meet to discuss a situation that affects both of our families. My heart began racing. What kind of situation? I think you know, Robert said quietly. I've been collecting evidence about my wife's activities for several weeks now, and your husband's name appears frequently in her personal correspondence. Personal correspondence, email exchanges, text messages, calendar entries for meetings that have nothing to do with medical care. Mrs. Dawson, I believe our spouses are having an affair, and I think we both deserve to know the full extent of their deception. We arranged to meet Saturday morning at a neutral location, a coffee shop on the opposite side of town where neither of us was likely to encounter anyone from our social circle. Robert Sterling turned out to be a distinguished man, in his early 50s, with graying hair and the kind of quiet intensity that suggested deep anger held carefully in check. He carried a leather portfolio that he set on the table between us with deliberate precision. I've been married to Vanessa for 14 years, he began without preamble. 3 months ago I noticed changes in her behavior that made me suspicious. Unexplained absences, secret phone calls, a general distraction that seemed inconsistent with her usual professional focus. He opened the portfolio and removed a stack of printed emails. I hired a private investigator to monitor her activities. What we discovered was extensive communication with your husband, including detailed discussions about their future plans together. I studied the email printouts with growing amazement. Messages between Marcus and Dr. Sterling that revealed not just an affair but elaborate planning for a life together that didn't include their current spouses. She's planning to leave her medical practice and relocate to Portland, Robert continued. Apparently your husband has convinced her that his career opportunities there are significant enough to justify starting over in a new city. The Portland connection suddenly made sense. Marcus's supposed business expansion wasn't about client development. It was about creating a foundation for a new life with Dr. Sterling. What do you plan to do with this information? I'm filing for divorce and seeking maximum financial compensation for her betrayal of our marriage, Robert said firmly. But I'm also considering whether her professional conduct warrants additional consequences. The Medical Ethics Board takes boundary violations very seriously, especially when they involve ongoing deception of patients' families. Vanessa has used her professional position to facilitate an affair with a patient's husband while continuing to provide medical care to his children. That's a clear violation of professional standards. I looked at Robert Sterling across the coffee shop table and realized we were natural allies in seeking justice for the betrayal we'd both experienced. What if we coordinated our efforts? I've been documenting evidence of their relationship for weeks. If we combine our information and file complaints simultaneously, it would be much harder for them to deny or minimize what they've done. Robert considered this for several moments. A coordinated approach would certainly be more effective than individual actions. They've been careful to compartmentalize their deception, but together we have access to evidence from multiple angles. We spent 2 hours comparing documentation and developing a strategic plan. Robert's private investigator had captured photographs of Marcus and Dr. Sterling together outside the medical office, in restaurants, and entering a hotel during what was supposed to be Marcus's business trip to Seattle. My evidence included the jewelry receipt, appointment records, and detailed timeline of their interactions disguised as medical care. When do you want to implement this plan? Robert asked as we prepared to leave. Soon, I said without hesitation. They've been deceiving us for months. I don't want to give them any more time to cover their tracks or prepare for consequences. Monday morning, I'll file the ethics complaint and serve Vanessa with divorce papers. The shock of simultaneous exposure should prevent any coordinated response on their part. I'll confront Marcus Monday evening, after he's had a full day to process the news about Dr. Sterling's situation. By then, the ethics investigation will be official, and he'll understand that the entire community will learn about their affair. Sunday passed in surreal normalcy. Marcus worked in the garden while I prepared family dinner. The children played in the backyard, and neighbors stopped by for casual conversation about community events and school activities. To any observer, we appeared to be the epitome of suburban family content. That evening, as Marcus and I sat on the back porch reviewing the upcoming week's schedule, I felt like I was memorizing the last moments of our life as it had existed for 16 years. Tomorrow, everything would change irrevocably. I've been thinking about that family vacation we discussed, Marcus said, sipping his coffee in the gathering twilight. Maybe we should plan something really special this summer. Take the kids somewhere they've never been, create some lasting memories together. That sounds wonderful, I replied, though the words felt hollow. Where were you thinking? Somewhere completely different from our usual routines. A place where we can focus entirely on being together as a family, without the distractions of work and daily responsibility. As Marcus talked about potential destinations and activities, I wondered if his enthusiasm for family bonding was motivated by guilt about his impending departure, or genuine affection for the life he was planning to abandon. The kids are at such a great age for adventure, he continued. Sophie's old enough to appreciate new experiences, and Tyler's becoming more independent every day. These family times become more precious as children grow up. They do, I agreed, studying his profile in the fading light. It's important to make the most of the time we have together. Marcus reached over and took my hand, a gesture that would have felt natural and loving just weeks ago but now seemed like performance. Claire, I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you do for our family. I know my work schedule has been demanding lately, and you've handled so much of the household responsibility. It's what partners do for each other, I said carefully. Still, I don't want you to feel taken for granted. You're an amazing wife and mother, and I'm lucky to have you. The conversation felt like an elaborate farewell speech, disguised as routine marital appreciation. Marcus was saying goodbye to our life together while pretending to strengthen our family bond. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, weather that seemed to match the transformation about to occur in multiple households across Riverside High. As Marcus prepared for what he believed would be another routine workday, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone, waiting for Robert Sterling's text confirmation that the ethics complaint had been filed. The message arrived at 9:15 a.m. Complaint submit. Divorce papers served at her office. The investigation begins today. I spent the morning cleaning the house with unusual thoroughness, as if preparing for guests who would see everything with fresh eyes. By afternoon, my phone was buzzing with calls from Dr. Sterling's office, messages I let go to voicemail, while I mentally prepared for the evening's confrontation. The first voicemail was from Kelly Morrison, her voice strained with professional control. "Miss Dawson, we need to reschedule Sophie's upcoming appointments due to some unexpected changes in Dr. Sterling's availability. Please call the office at your earliest convenience." The second message came directly from Dr. Sterling, her usual composed demeanor replaced by barely contained urgency. "Claire, there's been a misunderstanding that I need to clarify with you immediately. It's very important that we speak before you draw any conclusions about information you might have received today." By 4 o'clock my phone was ringing constantly. Dr. Sterling called 6 times in 2 hours, her messages becoming increasingly desperate as she realized the scope of what was unfolding. Marcus arrived home at his usual time, carrying his briefcase and wearing the expression of someone whose world had begun to crumble during business hours. His face was pale, his tie slightly askew, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before, genuine fear. "Claire, we need to talk," he said without his usual greeting routine. "Yes," I replied calmly, setting down the dish towel I'd been using to clean the kitchen. "I think we do. Where are the kids?" "Tyler's at basketball practice. Sophie's at Emma's house for a playdate. We have about 2 hours before either of them comes home." Marcus set his briefcase on the kitchen counter and turned to face me fully. "There's been a situation at Vanessa's office today, some kind of ethics investigation that involves false allegations about our professional relationship." "False allegations?" "Someone has made accusations about inappropriate conduct between us, which is completely untrue. The whole thing is a misunderstanding that's being blown out of proportion." I studied Marcus's face as he spoke, watching him construct a denial even as the evidence of his guilt was written in every line of tension around his eyes. "What kind of inappropriate conduct?" I asked quietly. "The allegations suggest we've been having personal meetings outside the scope of medical care, which is ridiculous. Any interactions we've had have been entirely professional, related to the children's healthcare and your family's well-being. Is that so?" Marcus stepped closer, his expression shifting to the earnest sincerity he'd always used when trying to convince me of something important. "Claire, you know me, you know I would never betray our family or compromise our children's medical care. Someone is trying to create problems for Vanessa because of her success, and they're using our family as ammunition. Someone like Robert Sterling." The color drained completely from Marcus's face. "What about Robert Sterling? He called me last week. Seems he's been collecting evidence about his wife's activities for quite some time. Interesting correspondence between you and Vanessa about your future plans together." Marcus sank into one of the kitchen chairs, his carefully constructed denials crumbling in real time. "Claire, let me explain." "Please do," I said, remaining standing while he struggled to find words that might somehow minimize the scope of his betrayal. "It started innocently. Vanessa was helping me understand some stress-related health issues, and our conversations gradually became more personal. Nothing physical happened for months. It was just emotional support during a difficult time in my career. Emotional support that required expensive jewelry and secret appointments." Marcus's head snapped up. "How do you know about the jewelry?" I smiled for the first time all day, a cold expression that felt foreign on my face but entirely appropriate for the moment. "Marcus, I've known about your affair for weeks. The appointments disguised as medical consultations, the lies about business trips, the planning for your new life in Portland. I know everything. If you knew, why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because I needed to understand the full scope of what you'd both done before I decided how to respond." I pulled out my phone and showed him the evidence I'd collected. Medical ethics complaints require extensive documentation. I wanted to make sure Vanessa faced appropriate professional consequences for her violations. Marcus stared at the photographs and documents on my phone screen, his face cycling through expressions of shock, recognition, and growing dread. "Claire, I know how this looks, but it's not what you think. Vanessa and I never intended for this to happen. We tried to fight our feelings, but sometimes connections develop that you can't control. Connections that you can't control, but you can certainly plan for. Hotels in Portland, apartment searches, discussions about her leaving her medical practice. That sounds quite controlled to me. We were exploring possibilities, not making definite plans. Everything was theoretical until we could figure out how to handle the situation responsibly. Responsibly? I laughed. A sound with no humor in it. Marcus, you've been conducting an affair with our children's doctor while lying to me for months. What part of that seems responsible? Marcus buried his face in his hands, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. This was the man I'd shared 16 years of marriage with, the father of my children, someone I'd once trusted completely, but the evidence of his systematic deception had erased any sympathy I might have felt for his current distress. What happens now? He asked without looking up. Now you face the consequences of your choices, I said simply. Vanessa's medical license is under investigation, her marriage is ending, and her career is probably over. You'll face your own consequences as well. What kind of consequence? Legal separation, spousal support, and community knowledge of exactly what kind of man you really are. I sat down across from him at the kitchen table, where we'd shared thousands of family meals. Marcus, you betrayed not just me, but our children. You put their medical care at risk by having an affair with their doctor. Those are consequences that extend far beyond our marriage. The kids don't have to know the details. The kids will know exactly what happened when the ethics investigation becomes public record. Tyler and Sophie deserve to understand why their family is changing, and they deserve to know that their mother fought for them when their father prioritized his own desires over their well-being. Marcus looked up at me with something approaching recognition, as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. You've changed, Claire. You're not the same person I married. You're right. I agreed. I'm not the woman who would quietly accept betrayal and deception. I'm someone who demands honesty and accountability, especially from people I trust with my family's welfare. As we sat across from each other in the kitchen that had been the heart of our family life, I realized the transformation was complete. The trusting wife who had worried about Sophie's stomach problems was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the most powerful response to betrayal was ensuring that everyone involved faced the full consequences of their choices. The confrontation was over. Now it was time for just. The kitchen fell silent except for the steady tick of our wall clock and the distant sound of neighbors returning home from work. Marcus sat slumped in his chair, staring at the evidence on my phone screen, while processing the reality that his carefully constructed double life had been systematically exposed. How long have you been planning this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Since the moment I realized you were lying about Tyler's sports physical, I replied, setting my phone on the table between us. That was 3 weeks ago, Marcus. 3 weeks of watching you lie to my face while planning your future with another woman. I never meant for it to go this far. It started as friendship. Someone who understood the pressures I was facing at work. Friendship that required $800 jewelry and secret hotel meetings. Marcus flinched as if I'd slapped him. The jewelry was a mistake. I was caught up in the excitement of feeling appreciated again, of having someone who saw my potential instead of just my obligations. Your obligations. The words came out sharper than I'd intended. Is that what your wife and children represent to you? Obligations? That's not what I meant. Then explain to me exactly what you did mean, because I'm having trouble understanding how caring for your family became such a burden that you needed to seek appreciation elsewhere. Marcus stood up and began pacing around the kitchen, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I'd seen thousands of times during our marriage, but now it looked like the performance of a man trying to buy time while his mind scrambled for explanations that might minimize his culpability. Claire, you have to understand the pressure I've been under at work, the competition for advancement, the constant travel, the stress of providing for our family while trying to build something meaningful for our future. And how exactly did having an affair with our family doctor help with any of that pressure? Vanessa understands ambition in a way that's different from other people. She's built her own successful practice. She knows what it takes to excel in a competitive environment. When I talked to her about my goals and challenges, she didn't just listen politely and change the subject. I stared at my husband as he essentially told me that our family doctor was a better wife to him than I had been. So this is my fault. I wasn't supportive enough of your career aspirations. No, that's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying, Marcus? because it sounds like you're explaining why you had to find someone else to appreciate your professional struggle. I'm saying that sometimes people connect in ways that transcend their original intentions. Vanessa and I discovered we had similar values about success and achievement, shared perspectives on what it means to build something significant with your life, shared perspectives that led to planning a new life together in Portland while lying to both of your families. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face me directly. We weren't making concrete plans. We were exploring possibilities, trying to understand what our connection meant for our respective futures. Marcus, I've seen the email. Robert Sterling showed me detailed discussions about Vanessa leaving her practice, about you establishing a client base in Portland, about apartments you'd looked at together. Those aren't theoretical explorations. Those are concrete plans for abandoning your family. The sound of the garage door opening interrupted our conversation. Tyler returning from basketball practice, 40 minutes earlier than I'd expected. Marcus and I looked at each other with shared panic, both understanding that our children needed to be protected from the worst of what was happening. "Mom, I'm home," Tyler's voice echoed through the house, followed by the familiar sound of his basketball bag hitting the floor in the mudroom. "We're in the kitchen," I called back, quickly closing the evidence on my phone and gesturing for Marcus to compose himself. Tyler appeared in the doorway, his hair still damp with perspiration and his face flushed from exercise. "Coach ended practice early because half the team has that stomach bug that's going around. Can I have a snack before dinner?" "Of course, sweetheart. There are apples and peanut butter in the pantry." As Tyler moved around the kitchen preparing his snack, the normalcy of the moment created a surreal contrast with the conversation Marcus and I had been having. Our 16-year-old son chatted about basketball drills and homework assignments, while his parents sat 3 feet away, dealing with the wreckage of their marriage. "Dad, you look weird," Tyler observed, studying Marcus's pale complexion. "Are you getting sick too?" "Just tired from a long day at work," Marcus managed. "How was practice?" "Good. Coach thinks I might make varsity next year if I keep improving my free throws." Tyler looked between his parents, his teenage intuition picking up on tension he couldn't quite identify. "Is everything okay? You both seem kind of stressed." "Everything's fine," I said quickly. "Just discussing some scheduling issues for next week." Tyler finished his snack and headed upstairs to shower and start homework, leaving Marcus and me alone again in the kitchen. But the interruption had shifted something in the atmosphere, reminding us both that our personal drama existed within the larger context of family life that required protection and careful handling. "We need to figure out how to tell the children," Marcus said quietly. "We need to figure out what you're going to do about your situation first," I replied. "Tyler and Sophie deserve to know their father is committed to making this right, not just minimizing the consequences." "What do you want from me, Claire? What would make this situation better?" "I want you to take full responsibility for what you've done. I want you to understand that your choices have hurt, not just me, but our children, who trusted both of you with their medical care while you were conducting an affair behind our backs. I take full responsibility. Because everything you've said tonight has been about pressure and stress and how your relationship with Vanessa was somehow inevitable rather than a series of deliberate choices to betray your family." Marcus sat back down at the table, his earlier defensiveness giving way to something that might have been genuine remorse. "You're right. I made deliberate choices to pursue a relationship with Vanessa while lying to you about it. I convinced myself that I deserved to feel appreciated and understood, and I used that justification to betray everything we'd built together. And the children's medical care. Do you understand how your affair compromised their health care?" "I never thought about it that way." "Of course you didn't, because you were thinking about yourself and your own desires rather than the welfare of your family." I leaned forward, making sure he understood the full scope of what he'd done. "Marcus, Sophie has been seeing Dr. Sterling for stomach problems that were probably caused by stress from sensing tension in our marriage. You put our daughter in the position of receiving medical care from your mistress while she was experiencing symptoms related to your affair." The color drained from Marcus's face as he processed the implications of what I'd said. "Oh God, Claire, I never connected those things." "That's because you compartmentalized your deception so completely that you stopped seeing how it affected the people around you." My phone buzzed with a text message from Nina Rodriguez. "Are you okay? I heard there was drama at the medical center today involving Dr. Sterling. The news was already spreading through our community's informal network. By tomorrow, everyone would know that our family doctor was under investigation for professional misconduct, and it wouldn't take long for people to connect the details. The whole community is going to know, I told Marcus, showing him Nina's text. Maybe we can contain the information somehow. Ask people to respect our privacy while we work through this. Marcus, the ethics investigation is public record. The details of your affair are documented evidence in an official complaint. There's no containing this information. Marcus buried his face in his hands again, the full reality of public exposure beginning to sink in. What about my job? When my colleagues and clients find out about this, it could destroy my career prospect. You should have considered that before you started an affair with our family doctor. Claire, please, I know I've made terrible mistakes, but there has to be some way to minimize the damage, for the children's sake, if not for mine. The damage was done when you chose to betray our family's trust. I'm not going to help you avoid the consequences of those choices. The front door opened again, this time announcing Sophie's return from her playdate. Her cheerful voice carried through the house as she called out her arrival and dropped her backpack in the front hallway. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway with grass stains on her jeans and paint smudges on her hands from an afternoon art project. Emma's mom said I could stay for dinner, but I told her we probably had family plans. No specific plans tonight, I said, grateful for Sophie's assumption about family togetherness. How was your afternoon? Really fun. We painted pictures of our families, and I made one with all four of us at the lake cottage we're going to rent this summer. Sophie looked expectantly between Marcus and me. We are still planning that vacation, right? The innocent question hung in the air between us, representing everything that was about to change in our children's lives. Marcus looked stricken, perhaps fully realizing for the first time that his affair would affect not just his marriage, but his children's sense of family security and future expectations. We'll talk about summer plans when we get closer to vacation time, I said carefully. Okay, can I have a snack? I'm starving, and Emma's mom only had healthy stuff like carrots and hummus. As Sophie rummaged through the pantry for more appealing snack options, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Sterling's personal cell phone number, which I'd never seen before but somehow wasn't surprised she had access to. I need to take this call privately, I told Marcus, stepping out onto the back porch. Claire, please don't hang up. Dr. Sterling's voice was strained with desperation. We need to talk about what happened today. I think we've talked enough. Vanessa, you don't understand the situation completely. The ethics complaint is based on misinterpretations of professional interaction. If you'd let me explain what really happened, I think we could resolve this misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I kept my voice low, aware that the children were inside but wanting to be clear about my position. Vanessa, I have documentation of your affair with my husband spanning several months. Hotel receipts, jewelry purchases, appointment records for non-medical meetings. What part of that is a misunderstanding? The relationship between Marcus and me developed gradually, and yes, it became personal, but I never compromised my professional responsibilities to your family. Sophie and Tyler received appropriate medical care regardless of my personal feelings for their father. You conducted an affair with a patient's husband while continuing to treat his children. That's a textbook boundary violation, and you know it. Claire, I understand that you're hurt and angry, but destroying my career won't heal your marriage. If we could meet in person, I think we could find a way to resolve this situation that protects everyone involved. Everyone involved? What about your husband, Vanessa? Robert Sterling seems quite committed to making sure you face appropriate consequences for betraying his trust. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Robert is acting out of hurt and anger. Once he calms down, he'll realize that destroying my career hurts him financially as well. So you think your husband should prioritize his financial interests over his emotional well-being? Interesting perspective for someone who supposedly understands the importance of supporting your partner. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Because it sounds like you think everyone should accommodate your affair for practical reasons, rather than holding you accountable for your professional and personal betrayals. I meant that sometimes, situations are more complicated than they appear from the outside. Marcus and I never intended for our connection to develop the way it did, but once it happened, We tried to handle it as responsibly as possible. Responsibly? You mean the secret meetings disguised as medical appointments, the lies to both of your family, the planning for a future together while maintaining your professional relationship with our children. We were trying to find a way to be honest about our feelings without unnecessarily hurting people. By planning to move to Portland together without telling your spouses until the last possible moment. Another long pause. How do you know about Portland? Vanessa, I know everything. The apartment searches, the discussions about you leaving your practice, Marcus's supposed business expansion that was really about creating a foundation for your new life together. I've been documenting your affair for weeks. If you've known for weeks, why didn't you say something soon? Because I wanted to make sure you faced appropriate professional consequences for violating medical ethics. Personal betrayal is one thing, but compromising patient care for the sake of an affair requires official accountability. I never compromised patient care. You conducted a sustained deception of a patient's family while using your medical practice as cover for an affair. That's compromising patient care, regardless of whether you provided adequate clinical treatment. I could hear Sterling crying on the other end of the line, her professional composure finally cracking under the weight of consequences she'd apparently never considered. Claire, please. My career is everything I've worked for since medical school. If I lose my license, I lose my identity, my financial security, everything I've built over 15 years of practice. You should have thought about that before you chose to have an affair with a patient's husband. Can't we find some way to resolve this privately? I'll end the relationship with Marcus immediately. Transfer your family's care to another physician. Do whatever it takes to make this right. The ethics complaint has already been filed, Vanessa. The investigation is official, there's no resolving this privately anymore. But you could withdraw the complaint, tell them you made a mistake, that you misunderstood the nature of my interactions with Marcus. I almost laughed at the suggestion. I could commit perjury to protect someone who betrayed my family's trust. That's your solution. I'm asking you to show mercy for someone who made a mistake. A mistake. Vanessa, you conducted a months-long affair while treating my children. You used your professional position to facilitate deception of your patient's family. Those aren't mistakes. Those are deliberate choices that violated every ethical standard of your profession. Please, Claire, I'm begging you to reconsider. There has to be some way to fix this. There is a way to fix. You can accept responsibility for what you've done, cooperate with the ethics investigation, and face the consequences of your choices with whatever dignity you have left. I hung up without waiting for her response and stood on the back porch for several minutes, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd lived for 8 years. The houses looked the same as they had that morning, but everything felt fundamentally different. By tomorrow, the story of Dr. Sterling's ethics violation would be spreading through every social circle in Riverside Heights. When I returned to the kitchen, Marcus was sitting at the table with Sophie, helping her with math homework while Tyler worked on a science project at the counter. The scene was so normal, so representative of thousands of family evenings we'd shared, that for a moment I felt disoriented by the contrast with the phone conversation I'd just finished. Was that Dr. Sterling? Marcus asked quietly when Sophie went upstairs to get her calculator. Yeah, she wanted to discuss resolving the situation privately. What did you tell her? I told her it was too late for private resolutions. The investigation is official, and she needs to face the consequences of her choices. Claire, I know you're angry with both of us, but is there any way to minimize the impact on the children? They don't need to know all the details of what happened. The children are going to find out anyway when the story becomes public. I'd rather they hear the truth from us than learn about it from their friends or social media. Social media? Marcus, you had an affair with a prominent physician in our community. The ethics investigation will be news. People will talk about it, share information, speculate about details. Our children will encounter this story whether we tell them or not. Tyler looked up from his science project, clearly overhearing parts of our conversation. What story? What's going on with Dr. Sterling? Marcus and I exchanged glances, both realizing that the moment for protected innocence had already passed. There's been a problem with Dr. Sterling's medical practice, I said carefully. Some questions about her professional conduct that need to be investigated. What kind of question? Tyler's 16-year-old mind was already processing implications. Is Sophie going to need a new doctor? Probably, yes. We'll find another family physician who can take over your medical care. Is this why you and Dad seem so stressed lately? Partly, I admit. There are some family issues we're working through that are related to the situation with Dr. Sterling. Tyler studied both of our faces with the intuitive intelligence of a teenager who'd grown up in a household where emotional undercurrents were usually hidden beneath polite conversation. Are you guys getting divorced? The question hit the kitchen like a physical force. Marcus went pale, and I felt my carefully maintained composure waver for the first time all day. Your father and I are going through some difficulties right now, I said slowly. We're not sure yet what that means for our family's future, but it's serious enough that you're talking about it with lawyers and stuff. How do you know about lawyers? Marcus asked. I heard Mom on the phone yesterday with someone named Catherine, talking about legal separation and custody arrangements. I'm not stupid, and I'm not deaf. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the serious tone of our conversation. What's custody arrangements? I looked at my two children, standing in the kitchen that had been the heart of our family life, and realized that the protective bubble of their childhood innocence was already dissolving. They deserved to know the truth, presented in terms they could understand and process. Sit down, both of you, I said, gesturing toward the kitchen table. Your father and I need to explain what's been happening. For the next hour, Marcus and I told our children an age-appropriate version of the truth. Dr. Sterling had violated professional boundaries by developing a personal relationship with Marcus, while serving as their family doctor. The relationship had created serious problems that required investigation by medical authorities and changes in our family structure. Tyler asked direct questions about the nature of the relationship, the timeline of events, and the potential consequences for everyone involved. Sophie focused more on immediate concerns about medical care and family stability. So Dr. Sterling was like Dad's girlfriend while she was our doctor? Sophie asked, trying to understand the dual betrayal. Yes, I said simply. That's not allowed for doctors, and it's not allowed for married people. Are you and Dad going to stay married? We don't know yet, sweetheart. We're going to spend some time apart while we figure out what's best for our family. Where will Dad live? Marcus answered this question himself. I'll probably stay in an apartment nearby so I can still see you regularly and help with school activities and sport. Will we still go on family vacations? The question hung in the air, representing everything that was uncertain about our future. We'll figure out new ways to spend time together. It might be different from what we're used to, but you'll still have both parents who love you very much. Both children asked more questions, processed the information in their individual ways, and eventually accepted that their parents' marriage was changing in ways that would affect their daily lives, but not their fundamental security. After Tyler and Sophie went to bed, Marcus and I sat in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of our family life. Photo albums, children's artwork, furniture we'd chosen together during happier times. I never wanted it to end this way, Marcus said quietly. How did you want it to end? With you and Vanessa moving to Portland while I stayed here raising our children? I didn't think that far ahead. I was living day to day, trying to manage my feelings for her while maintaining our family life. That's not thinking, Mark. That's just delaying consequences while the damage accumulated. I know. I see that now. Do you? Because I think you see that you got caught, not that you made fundamentally wrong choices. Marcus looked around the living room, taking inventory of what he was losing. I see that I destroyed the best thing in my life for something that was ultimately an illusion. An illusion. Vanessa represented freedom from responsibility, excitement instead of routine, appreciation instead of obligation. But that's not real life. Real life is building something lasting with someone who's committed to staying even when things get difficult. And you realized this when I saw the evidence you'd collected, when I understood how systematically I'd betrayed not just you, but Tyler and Sophie. When I realized that everyone in our community was going to know what kind of man I really am. I studied Marcus's face in the lamplight, trying to determine whether his apparent remorse was genuine, or simply fear of consequences. What happens now depends on how you handle the next few weeks. The children need to see that you're committed to making this right, not just minimizing the damage to yourself. What does making it right look like? Full honesty about what you did, cooperation with the ethics investigation, taking responsibility for your choices without blaming stress or misunderstanding or inevitable attraction, and proving to Tyler and Sophie that their father is someone who learns from his mistakes rather than someone who makes excuses for them. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back their respect. Good. Because tomorrow morning, the entire community is going to know that Dr. Sterling is under investigation for professional misconduct related to her relationship with you. How you handle that public exposure will determine whether you rebuild your reputation or destroy what's left of it. Marcus nodded, understanding that his personal crisis was about to become community knowledge with professional and social consequences he was only beginning to comprehend. As I went upstairs to check on the children one final time, I realized that the hardest part was over. The investigation was underway, the truth was exposed, and consequences were beginning to unfold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but the phase of living with deception and betrayal was finally ending. Tyler and Sophie were both asleep, their faces peaceful in the soft glow of nightlights that had guided them through childhood. Whatever changes lay ahead for our family, they would face them with the truth instead of lies, supported by a mother who had fought for their welfare when their father had prioritized his own desires. The reckoning had begun, and justice was finally within reach. 6 weeks after the ethics complaint was filed, I sat in the Riverside Medical Ethics Board hearing room, watching Dr. Vanessa Sterling's professional life systematically dismantled by her own documented choices. The proceeding was clinical and thorough, with board members reviewing evidence that painted an undeniable picture of sustained professional misconduct. Dr. Patricia Wells, the board chairwoman, read from the investigative report with the measured tone of someone accustomed to delivering career-ending news. The evidence demonstrates a pattern of boundary violations extending over 7 months, including the use of medical appointments to facilitate personal meetings with a patient's spouse, acceptance of expensive gifts, and deliberate deception of patient families regarding the nature of professional interactions. Dr. Sterling sat at the respondent's table with her attorney, her usual polished appearance replaced by something hollow and defeated. The auburn hair that had always been perfectly styled was pulled back severely, and the confident demeanor that had made patients trust her completely was nowhere to be seen. Dr. Sterling, do you wish to make a statement before the board renders its decision? Dr. Wells asked. Sterling stood slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the table. I accept full responsibility for my actions, and deeply regret the harm I've caused to the patients and families who trusted me with their care. I violated the ethical standards of my profession and betrayed the trust placed in me as a healthcare provider. Her voice cracked as she continued. I understand that my choices have consequences that extend far beyond my own career, and I'm prepared to accept whatever penalty the board deems appropriate. The board deliberated for 37 minutes before returning with their unanimous decision. Dr. Sterling's medical license was permanently revoked, with no possibility of reinstatement. She was also required to pay substantial fines and undergo professional counseling, though both seemed academic, given that her medical career was effectively over. As the hearing concluded, I watched Sterling gather her belongings with the careful movements of someone whose entire identity had just been erased. She glanced in my direction once, her eyes carrying a mixture of resentment and something that might have been recognition that I'd done what she would have done in my position. Outside the hearing room, Robert Sterling was waiting with his attorney to discuss the civil lawsuit he'd filed against his now ex-wife for damages related to her affair. Their divorce had been finalized 2 weeks earlier, with Sterling forfeiting most of their marital assets due to her documented infidelity. Justice has a way of working itself out, Robert said when he saw me in the hallway. Thank you for having the courage to file the complaint. Too many people would have handled this privately and allowed her to continue practicing. She made her choices, I replied simply. I just made sure she faced appropriate consequences for them. The drive home took me past the Riverside Family Medical Center, where a new sign announced that Patricia Hamilton had taken over the practice. Sophie and Tyler had been seeing Dr. Hamilton for several weeks now, and both children appreciated her straightforward approach to medical care, without the overly personal investment that had characterized Dr. Sterling's treatment style. At home, I found Tyler in the kitchen making after-school snacks while Sophie worked on homework at the table. The rhythm of our household had stabilized into new patterns that felt both familiar and fundamentally different from our previous family life. "How did the hearing go?" Tyler asked, looking up from the sandwich he was constructing. "Dr. Sterling lost her medical license permanently," I said, settling into my usual chair at the kitchen table. "She won't be practicing medicine anymore." "Good," Sophie said without looking up from her math problem. "She was mean to our family." Over the past month and a half, both children had processed the dissolution of their parents' marriage with the resilience that often surprises adults. Tyler had asked direct questions about the timeline and consequences of his father's affair, while Sophie had focused more on ensuring that the new family structure would provide the security she needed. Marcus had moved into a furnished apartment across town, maintaining regular contact with the children, but no longer living in the house where he'd conducted his deception. Our legal separation agreement provided financial support while allowing me to remain in the family home with Tyler and Sophie. "Mom, can we invite Dad for dinner this weekend?" Sophie asked, erasing a math error with more force than necessary. "I miss having family dinners together." "We can ask him if he'd like to join us," I agreed. "But remember what we talked about regarding new family traditions. Some things will be different now, but different doesn't mean worse." The doorbell interrupted our conversation, followed by Nina Rodriguez's familiar voice calling through the screen door. "Claire, are you home? I brought celebration cookies." Nina appeared in the kitchen carrying a bakery box and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who'd been following a dramatic story to its conclusion. "I heard the news about Dr. Sterling's license. How are you feeling?" "Relieved," I said honestly. "It's been 6 weeks of uncertainty, but now there's official acknowledgement that what she did was wrong." "And Marcus, how is he handling the public attention?" The public attention had been significant. Local news outlets had covered the ethics hearing, focusing on the unusual circumstances of a family physician losing her license due to an affair with a patient's husband. Marcus's name hadn't been mentioned in news reports, but word had spread through professional and social networks with the efficiency that characterizes small communities. "He's struggling with the professional consequences," I said, accepting a chocolate chip cookie from Nina's offering. "Several clients have ended their relationships with his firm, and his promotion prospects have obviously been affected." "As they should be," Nina said firmly. "Actions have consequences, especially when they involve betraying trust." Tyler looked up from his homework with the expression of someone who'd been thinking seriously about adult complexities. "Mom, do you think Dad learned anything from what happened? Or is he just upset that he got caught?" The question was perceptive and direct, reflecting the way both children had begun analyzing their father's behavior with clear eyes, rather than unconditional childhood loyalty. "I think he's learning," I said carefully. "Your father made choices that hurt our family, but he's working with a counselor to understand why he made those choices, and how to make better decisions in the future." "Will you ever get back together?" "No, sweetheart. Too much has happened for us to rebuild our marriage. But we're both committed to being good parents to you and Tyler, even if we're not married anymore." Sophie nodded, accepting this information with the practical wisdom of an 11-year-old who'd already adjusted to the reality of her parents' separation. "I'm glad you didn't let Dr. Sterling keep being mean to families." After Nina left and the children finished their homework, I sat on the back porch with my evening coffee and reflected on the transformation that had occurred over the past 2 months. The woman who'd sat in this same chair worrying about Sophie's stomach problems was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own strength and wouldn't accept betrayal quietly. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Brooks, my attorney, confirming that the final paperwork for our legal separation had been filed with the court. The financial arrangements were generous, reflecting both the documentation of Marcus's infidelity and his genuine desire to provide for his children's security. Thursday evening brought an unexpected visitor when Marcus appeared at the front door carrying takeout from the Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. He looked tired and somewhat thinner than he'd been 2 months ago, with new lines around his eyes that suggested sustained stress. "I brought dinner for everyone," he said when I answered the door. "I was hoping we could eat together as a family, if that's okay with you." Tyler and Sophie were delighted to see their father, and we settled around the kitchen table for a meal that felt both familiar and strange. The conversation was careful, focusing on school activities and weekend plans rather than the larger issues that had reshaped our family dynamic. "How's the new apartment?" Sophie asked, twirling spaghetti around her fork with concentrated effort. "It's fine," Marcus replied. "Small, but comfortable. I've been thinking about getting a dog, actually, something to keep me company, and maybe provide some entertainment when you guys visit." "What kind of dog?" Tyler asked, his interest clearly piqued. "Maybe a golden retriever, something friendly and active that would enjoy hiking and playing in the park." As Marcus described his tentative plans for single life, I found myself studying his face for signs of genuine change versus performance. There was something different about his demeanor, a quieter quality that suggested he'd spent considerable time thinking about his choices and their consequences. After dinner, while the children watched television in the living room, Marcus helped me clean up in the kitchen. The domestic routine felt surreal given everything that had happened, but there was something peaceful about working together without the underlying tension that had characterized our interactions during the final months of our marriage. "Claire, I want you to know that I've been meeting with a therapist to understand how I convinced myself that the affair was justified," Marcus said as he dried dishes. "I'm beginning to see how selfish and destructive my thinking became." "That's good, Marcus. Tyler and Sophie need to see that you're committed to becoming a better person, not just someone who got caught making bad choices. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to make sure I never hurt them the way I hurt you. They deserve a father who takes responsibility for his actions and learns from his mistakes." "They do," I agreed, "and they're watching to see whether you follow through on that commitment." Marcus nodded, understanding that rebuilding his children's respect would require sustained effort rather than good intentions. "How are you doing? Really doing, not just managing the practical aspects of everything." "I'm discovering who I am when I'm not trying to maintain a marriage that was built on lies," I said honestly. "It's liberating in ways I didn't expect." "You seem stronger, more confident." "I am stronger. Going through this experience taught me that I don't have to accept betrayal quietly or protect other people from the consequences of their choices." Friday brought news that Dr. Sterling had left Riverside Heights entirely, selling her house and relocating to another state where she would presumably attempt to rebuild her life in a different professional capacity. The information came through the informal network that tracks such developments in small communities, and I felt a sense of closure knowing that chapter was definitively ended. That afternoon, I received a phone call from Angela Martinez, a woman I'd never met who introduced herself as someone going through a similar situation with her husband's affair. "I heard about your case through a friend who works at the medical center," Angela explained. "I was wondering if you might be willing to meet for coffee and share some advice about how you handled the situation." "What kind of situation are you dealing with?" "My husband has been having an affair with his secretary, and when I confronted him about it, he made me feel like I was being paranoid and unreasonable. Everyone keeps telling me to work it out in counseling, but I think there should be consequences for betraying your family." We met the following day at a cafe downtown, where Angela told me her story with the familiar combination of hurt and determination that I recognized from my own experience. Her husband had been conducting an affair for 8 months while convincing her that her suspicions were signs of insecurity and mistrust. "How did you find the strength to fight back instead of just accepting it?" Angela asked. "I realized that accepting betrayal quietly doesn't protect your family," I said. "It just enables more betrayal while teaching your children that some people don't have to face consequences for their actions. But everyone says fighting back will just make things messier for the kid." "The mess was created when your husband chose to have an affair. Exposing the truth and demanding accountability doesn't create problems, it reveals problems that already exist." Over the next hour, I shared practical advice about documentation, legal resources, and the importance of building a support network. Angela listened with the focused attention of someone who'd been looking for permission to trust her instincts and fight for her own dignity. "Thank you," she said, as we prepared to leave. "Talking to you helped me realize that I don't have to just accept this situation." "You don't, and you should." 3 weeks later, Angela called to tell me she'd filed for divorce and that her husband's employer was investigating his relationship with his secretary for potential workplace harassment violations. "I followed your example," she said. "I gathered evidence, documented everything, and made sure there were professional consequences for both of them." The phone call made me realize that my experience had become something larger than personal justice. Other women were using my approach as a template for demanding accountability in their own situations. Saturday morning brought a family breakfast that had become a new tradition. Marcus joined us for pancakes and coffee, with conversation flowing more naturally than it had in months. Tyler shared news about making the varsity basketball team. Sophie showed off her latest art project, and Marcus talked about his therapy sessions with genuine openness. "I want you both to know that what happened between your mother and me was my fault," Marcus told the children. "I made choices that hurt our family, and I'm working to understand why I made those choices so I never make them again." "Are you sorry?" Sophie asked with the directness that children bring to important questions. "I'm sorry that I hurt people I love, and I'm sorry that my actions changed our family. But I'm also grateful that your mother was strong enough to demand the truth, because living with lies was hurting all of us." Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad Mom didn't just let it go. You needed to face consequences for what you did." "You're right," Marcus agreed, "and facing those consequences is helping me become a better person." As I watched Marcus interact with our children, I could see genuine changes in his approach to responsibility and honesty. The man who'd conducted a months-long affair while lying about it had been replaced by someone who understood that trust had to be earned through consistent actions rather than charming words. Sunday afternoon, I sat in my garden with a book and a cup of tea, enjoying the peaceful solitude that had become one of the unexpected benefits of single life. The house was quiet, with Tyler at a friend's house and Sophie at her art class, leaving me free to think about the future without the constant management of other people's needs and schedules. My phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Hamilton's office, confirming routine checkup appointments for both children. The text was purely professional, focused on healthcare rather than personal interest in our family dynamics. It reminded me how inappropriate Dr. Sterling's behavior had been and how much healthier our current medical relationship felt. 6 months after the ethics hearing, I received a letter from the state medical board informing me that Dr. Sterling had applied for a medical license in Colorado and that my complaint was being reviewed as part of their background investigation. I provided a detailed statement about her conduct, ensuring that any future patients would be protected from the kind of boundary violations my family had experienced. The letter also included information about a support group for families affected by medical professional misconduct. I'd been considering whether to share my experience more publicly, perhaps helping other families recognize and respond to similar violations. That evening, as I helped Sophie with homework while Tyler practiced piano in the living room, I realized how much our family dynamic had improved without the underlying tension of Marcus's deception. The children were more relaxed, our conversations were more honest, and I was more present as a parent when I wasn't constantly managing the stress of a troubled marriage. "Mom, are you happier now?" Sophie asked, looking up from her science project. "Yes, sweetheart, I am happier." "Good. You laugh more and you don't seem worried all the time." The observation was accurate. I did laugh more, worry less, and feel more like myself than I had in years. The process of exposing the truth and demanding justice had been difficult, but it had also been empowering in ways that extended far beyond my relationship with Marcus. A year later, I stood in the community center addressing a group of 30 women who'd come to hear about recognizing and responding to professional boundary violations. The workshop had grown from informal conversations with women like Angela into a structured program that provided practical guidance for families facing similar situations. "The most important thing to remember," I told the group, "is that you don't have to accept betrayal quietly. Professional misconduct thrives in silence, but it can't survive transparency and accountability." The women in the audience asked questions about documentation, legal resources, and finding the courage to fight back against people in positions of authority. Their stories were similar to mine, involving trust betrayed by professionals who'd used their positions to exploit vulnerable families. After the workshop, a young mother approached me with tears in her eyes. Thank you for showing us that we have power in these situations. I've been feeling helpless about my situation, but now I understand that I can demand consequences. Driving home from the workshop, I reflected on how the experience of betrayal had ultimately led to something positive and meaningful. My family was stronger, my children had learned important lessons about integrity and accountability, and other women were finding the courage to protect their families from similar violations. Tyler and Sophie were waiting at home with pizza and stories about their respective days. At 17 and 13, they'd grown into confident young people who understood that trust was earned through actions, and that consequences were appropriate when trust was violated. How was your workshop, Mom? Tyler asked. Productive. Several women are going to file ethics complaints against professionals who violated their trust. Good, Sophie said firmly. People should face consequences when they're mean to family. As we sat around the kitchen table sharing dinner and conversation, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought us to this point. The woman who'd worried about Dr. Sterling's too personal interest in Marcus had been replaced by someone who understood her own strength and wouldn't hesitate to use it when protecting her family. The affair had ended Marcus's marriage and Dr. Sterling's career, but it had also revealed truths that needed to be exposed and created opportunities for growth that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Justice hadn't just been served, it had become a foundation for building something better than what had been destroyed. The transformation was complete, and the future was full of possibilities that didn't require accepting betrayal or protecting others from consequences they'd earned through their own choices. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.